Welcome to the Gray Divorce Podcast, hosted by divorce financial analyst and retirement planning counselor Andrew Hatherley. Join Andrew and guest experts as they help late-life divorcees build the financial and mental foundation for a meaningful future. There is life after divorce. Now, on to the show.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to a short yet special edition of the Gray Divorce Podcast. I wanted to take a break from our regularly scheduled programming to commemorate this, the 50th episode of the Gray Divorce Podcast, and to thank you all for listening and supporting the podcast, particularly you lovely people who've given the podcast a 5-star rating. I appreciate it as it helps get the show out to more people. There's a nice symmetry in recognizing episode 50 as Gray Divorce, of course, is defined as divorce happening at age 50 and beyond. And hopefully in a couple of years from now, maybe even sooner, we can celebrate the century mark of the podcast. Over the next 15 minutes or so, I'd like to share with you some of the highlights from some of the more popular episodes of the podcast. As I reviewed the podcast analytics, I was surprised to see which episodes resonated the most with you. So I thought you might find it interesting, as well as I recap the 5 most popular episodes of the podcast. I'd also like to give you a little behind-the-scenes look at the creation and production of the Gray Divorce Podcast in the hopes that it might inspire you to embark on your own creative projects. For many of us, finding our mojo after divorce might involve creative projects. The act of building or creating something after divorce fits in with the theme of growth and rebuilding, which is one of the main themes of this podcast overall. And regular listeners will be familiar with my mantra that there is life after divorce. And it can be a much richer, happier, more purposeful life when given the opportunity to hit the reset button and to consider what are the things that really energize us. Certainly, when we're going through divorce, our imaginations run wild with negative scenarios about the future of our finances or the future of our relationships. But this catastrophic thinking rarely pans out in reality. There may be rebuilding financially, and I certainly know about that firsthand, but the journey back can be one of incredible growth, both personally and financially. I've got to tell you, when I was divorced in 2015 at the age of 52, I would never have predicted that 7 years later at the age of 59, I would embark on creating a bi-weekly podcast dedicated to mid to late life divorce. But I determined that the best way to turn the lemons of my divorce experience into lemonade was to help educate people about the divorce process and learn not only from my mistakes, but from the mistakes of many other people who've gone through divorce, so that if you find yourself going through divorce, you're well armed with knowledge about the process so as to make it a less painful experience, both financially and emotionally. As a financial advisor, I must admit I was humbled when I went through my divorce. I was humbled about what I didn't know about the process, which is, for many people, the largest financial transaction in their lives. And that experience led me to earning the CDFA credential, which stands for Certified Divorce Financial Analyst, and starting my divorce financial consulting business, Wiser Divorce Solutions. Wiser Divorce Solutions helps people before and during the divorce process, while Transcend Retirement, my investment advisory business, helps people with the financial planning after divorce. But I won't spend any more time talking about me. If you want to hear more about my story, check out episode 2 of the Gray Divorce Podcast, titled What is Grey Divorce?, where I talk about the societal phenomenon of mid to late life divorce and how it's grown over the last 30 years, and of course, how I became part of the phenomenon back in 2015. Incidentally, that podcast was the second most listened to podcast out of the first 49 episodes. Let me briefly review, in reverse order, the other 4 episodes you found most popular. Episode 7, The 11 Things to Do Now in Divorce, was the 5th most popular episode. This episode is essentially an outline of my live divorce workshop presentations and a very practical overview of key tips to follow in divorce. I'm not surprised that it attracted listeners. You might want to revisit the episode in the podcast archives. I won't list all 11 points here, but among the top ones, make sure you have money available to you and that you have a bank account that you control. It'll give you a lot of peace of mind when you go through the process. And get as organized as possible and gather as many financial documents as you can. In doing so, you'll help the financial and legal professionals you're working with, and they'll be able to focus more on helping you than trying to organize your paperwork. 2 other key points are to consider the tax consequences of potential divorce settlements and to make a budget and monitor your spending. This is important when it comes time to negotiate spousal support. Finally, get professional help. In episode 26, I spoke with attorney Philip Spradling about the perils of do-it-yourself divorce, and in the subsequent episode 27, I chatted about the team approach to grey divorce. Believe me, bringing in the right professionals will end up saving you a lot more money and grief in the long term. The 4th most popular episode, in keeping with the theme of practical financial advice, was episode 3 on Social Security. In this episode, I discussed how important it is for late-life divorcees to get it right and maximize their Social Security benefits after divorce. I discussed how spousal, or better said, ex-spousal, Social Security benefits work, and the basic rules of eligibility. Remember that you have to have been married for 10 consecutive years or longer to claim Social Security on your ex-spouse's record, that you and your ex-spouse have to be at least 62 before you can claim as an ex-spouse, and to collect on your ex-spouse's record, you must not be remarried. And you must have been divorced for 2 years or longer, or your ex-spouse must already be claiming retirement benefits. Remember that if you qualify as an ex-spouse based on this criteria, your retirement benefit will be half of your ex-spouse's primary insurance amount, as long as you claim at your full retirement age. You could claim as early as age 62, but you'll get less than you would claiming at full retirement age. I'm not going to go into all the details here. As you can tell, there are a lot. You can hear them on episode 3. And I really do encourage you to speak to someone at your local Social Security Administration office directly. Make an appointment and go down there and discuss your unique situation with them. The 3rd most popular episode was episode 31, Should I Stay or Should I Go? A discussion on discernment counseling with Linda Hirschman, a licensed marriage and family therapist. For those of you who might have missed the episode, discernment counseling is a short-term therapy approach specifically designed for couples in crisis. Discernment counseling focuses on helping couples get clarity about their relationship and make an informed decision as to whether the relationship has a future. In short, this type of counseling helps couples answer the question, should we stay or should we go? My chat with Linda really focused on older divorcees and went into the economic impact of divorce late in life when less time exists to recover financially. We discussed how discernment counseling differs from marriage counseling and how it might help you determine whether discernment counseling is right for you and how you can find a good discernment counselor in your area. I already discussed podcast episode 2, which was the second most popular episode, so let's go straight to number 1. The most popular episode over the last 2 years was my interview with Dr. Carol Hughes. In episode 16 of the Grey Divorce podcast, we discussed adult children of grey divorce. This was a great conversation, and maybe I shouldn't be surprised that it was the most popular of the 49 podcasts to date. Carol is the co-author of the book titled Home Will Never Be the Same Again, A Guide for Adult Children of Grey Divorce. And I think the reason this episode was so popular is that this is an area of divorce that is so often overlooked, the impact of late-life divorce on adult children. Because the law is so focused on protecting minor children in divorce, a myth has emerged that once these children become adults, their parents' divorce has no effect on them. But how can that be, when so many studies have shown that happiness and contentment in life is really the result of the quality of one's relationships with other people, whether they be family, friends, or colleagues? When someone's parents are getting divorced, those key relationships can be altered or transformed completely, bringing with it stress and anxiety. This episode is full of practical examples and advice on how divorcing parents and their adult children might better deal with divorce in the family, and it's one of the episodes I'm most proud of. Let me conclude by putting the occasion of the 50th episode of the Grey Divorce podcast in the context of moving forward with something productive and meaningful after grey divorce. I'm sure many of you out there have dreams, projects, or goals you'd like to accomplish. You might be in the before or during stage of divorce right now, and obviously your focus is on getting through the process. Or maybe you've just emerged from divorce and you're still a little shell-shocked. I understand. It took me a year or two after my divorce to kind of regain my bearings and move forward. Maybe you have a goal of writing a book or performing stand-up comedy. Maybe you're thinking of starting a business or maybe even starting your own podcast or YouTube channel. My advice? Do it. I know a lot of people who talk about doing podcasts or YouTube channels or writing a book or whatever, but they get bogged down in minute details, asking questions like, oh, what camera should I use? Or what's the best microphone? Or I don't have a studio set up. These are all forms of resistance that Steven Pressfield talked about in his famous book, The War of Art. I love the saying, perfect is the enemy of done. It's a learning process. We have to start somewhere. Another saying I love, nothing happens until something moves. Just start something and you'll create some momentum. And that momentum can bring all sorts of benefits you hadn't anticipated in the first place. I created this podcast because I love sharing valuable information. And yes, I certainly saw the podcast as a way to establish my name as a divorce financial professional and help people before, during, and after divorce. But I've also learned so much in researching and preparing for the episodes and interviewing experts in so many different professions related to divorce. It's made me a better divorce financial analyst and a better financial advisor. It's also introduced me to some great people with whom I've built some great relationships. And the podcast has given me the opportunity to be a guest on many other podcasts and to speak at numerous conferences around the country. So I encourage you, if you have any projects that have been on the back burner for years or even decades, get started. If you know there are things you love to do that put you in that flow state where you lose track of time, where you become engrossed in your task, do them. Share your knowledge or passion with the world. I'd love to hear about your growth journey through and after divorce. Just message me through the podcast app. Also, I'd love to hear your opinions about the podcast, good or bad, brickbats or bouquets. Are there any topics that you'd like to hear more of in the future? And for those of you who do like the podcast, please don't hesitate to subscribe and rate the podcast. 5 stars, I hope, on your podcast apps. Until next time, take care and see you again on episode 51 in 2 weeks.
Thanks so much for tuning in to this episode of the Gray Divorce Podcast. To learn more or get in contact with your host, you can visit Andrew's website at transcendretirement.net. Also, please feel free to rate, subscribe, and leave a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. That helps others find the show, and we greatly appreciate it. Thanks again for listening, and we'll catch you in the next episode.
Information provided is educational only and should not be construed as legal or tax advice. Each situation is unique and should be discussed with your tax or legal advisor prior to implementation. Andrew Hatherley is not an attorney and does not provide legal advice. Information provided is financial in nature. Advisory services offered through Hatherley Capital Management, LLC. Divorce financial analysis services offered through Wiser Divorce Solutions, an affiliated company.